I sat up with no idea what had just happened. I was even more dumbfounded when I looked to where the ruined buildings should be only to find a crater a few feet deep and no remains of the farm we came across. Well, no remains where they should be. The debris of the few buildings was scattered in the trees. Some trees had been knocked over entirely from the force. How we were still alive was a miracle. Shaking my head, I confirmed what I was seeing wasn't a dream, and then worry spiked in my gut for my partner. I looked down to see Nick unconscious on his side, his arms still wrapped around my waist. At the last second, he used his body to shield mine from the massive blast that should have killed us both. The entire back of his clothing was burned away and his skin was red. Another tidbit I'd learned was that the agent's suits were imbued with magic to protect the wearer from damages, and it would also repair itself. His suit was already starting to reform around the edges. At least Nicky was still breathing. I wanted to know if he was alright, but at the same time didn't want to move him in case his injuries were beyond what I could see. His eyes started to open and I told him to stay down. Of course, he didn't listen to me. Sitting up, we both looked over the massive amount of damage from the one little bullet he made. You said there were 2 overcharged bullets, right? I asked. Nick didn't even respond. He just took my magazines to sort through the remaining bullets to find the other bomb he created. I stood up to check on the car. I was fine thanks to my partner, but we still didn't want to stay the night even if Nick had recovered by then. I'd hoped it was far enough away from the blast to survive the same way we did, but it was not as lucky. I found it wrapped around a tree. All the other cars left behind from the deceased farm workers looked about the same. I went back to Nick, who looked alright considering how injured his back was. Do you want the long or short answer on the car? I asked him, walking over. Short. It's fucked. He stopped checking the bullets to look over at me. He was more startled by my word choice than by the fact our car was ruined. Normally I had the mouth of a sailor, but since being around Nick, I'd toned it down. In fact, I don't think he's heard me outright curse like that before. It was an odd thing to notice considering our situation. His good nature must be rubbing off on me. Can you use a spell to get us out of here? I hoped. Sadly, no. This place is surrounded by a magic barrier to keep the bats inside in case something like this happened. I am not strong enough to get past it. Well, it sucks. If we started to walk, then we would not reach the fence before night. Nick wasn't healed yet, so until he was better, walking or fighting was out of the question. At least that bullet wiped out any creatures along with everything else in the area. He found the other suspect bullet rather quickly and returned the gun and holster. He then checked his phone to see if he could call backup, only to find it dead. Mine was as well. That magic blast ruined our phones and the last chance we had for help. The guard would call for backup, but that meant staying in the woods surrounded by monsters all night. I'll hold on to this bullet for now. I do not wish to risk using it. Let's get started walking to the... Nick tried to stand up as he was speaking. His voice was weaker than normal. He only got halfway to his feet before falling forwards. I caught him so his face didn't slam into the ground. For a thin guy, he was heavy. With some effort, I got him back to the ground, his entire body dead weight and head slumped. Take a break, Nicky. We'll get moving when you're better. He did not appear happy over that plan. His body refused to listen to his wishes, and Nick was asleep in a few seconds, leaving me alone to keep an eye out for any creatures that might decide to try to make us a snack. As the hours passed, I started to get more and more stressed out. Fear was settling in my shoulders. It would be very bad if Nick wasn't feeling better by the time the sun went down. I was under the impression that somewhere off in the forest was a hungry horde just waiting for the dark. How long could I hold out alone with only a gun? The sky was turning orange and I was sweating. A hand fell on my shoulder, causing me to jump. I knew it wasn't a bat, but it still startled me. Nick sat up, his suit repaired, and he didn't appear as tired as before. I apologize for sleeping for so long. I am unaware of what took up all my energy, he admitted, considering the size of the blast. It wasn't surprising he was so weak. It was only a surprise we both lived. My heart was still beating from him suddenly touching my shoulder. I shifted to face him so we could figure out the next step. It's fine, but now what? Are we going to try and make it to the fence? He paused to think for a moment, trying to see if there was a faster way other than on foot. I could have started on without him, but I didn't want to leave him alone in the open. I also didn't think I would reach the fence before nightfall and didn't want to be in the woods alone. Yes, that is the only option, but I am concerned about you fighting in the dark. It is not a full moon and shall be hard to see what you are firing at. Nick said. That was a good point. Unlike him, I couldn't see in the dark. If a swarm of bats came at us, I might be blind depending on how bright the moon was. I know I keep asking if there is a magic way to solve these things, but is there a spell to give me night vision or something? There is, but I do not have enough power or a tool to drain magic from to make the spell. We both looked around hoping to see a body of a bat we could use. They'd been blown away with everything else, and I didn't kill any while Nick slept. I asked if he could just use his blood, but he shook his head. Oddly enough, His blood had too much magic, so he would suffer a blowback using it. He could only make the bullets because he fused alchemy in the process, but could not do the same to give me night vision. A few minutes passed until I got an idea. Can't you use the magic in that overpowered bullet you made? Now that would work. As the sun was setting, Nick drew a circle for me to stand inside. He quickly got the writing finished and needed to be very careful on the amount of power he pulled from the bullet. I did trust him, but still felt nervous when the circle he drew in the dirt glowed, blinking. I didn't notice anything different. Nick was shaking his hand as if it hurt. He received some damage, but not much. The bullet stored so much magic he barely made a dent using that one spell. He placed it back into his pocket and turned to face me. I'm the faster runner. We may have a chance of getting to safety if I carry you. Seriously? I asked. Well, I suppose that was an idea, because it was just the two of us. I shouldn't be embarrassed over the idea. I was, though. Nick turned around to get on one knee. Awkwardly, I got onto his back. My hands were free so I could fire if needed. This was part of the mission I would ask Nick to keep out of the final report. The moment I was secured, he took off in a mad dash, wanting to cover as much ground as possible. The trees flew past as we tried to outrun the setting sun. He wove through bushes while staying out of the way of tree branches. With this rough terrain, it should have given him some issues, but Nick didn't slow down. When the sun set, I found I could see as if the moon was full. It wasn't perfect night vision, but it was much better than nothing. I could hear the bats starting to screech off in the night. I mentally urged Nick to run faster. A dark shape dropped in front of us, without slowing his pace. Nick drew the orchestra to slice the bat in half. I clung to him, nearly losing my grip as he moved. He might be able to fight and run with someone on his back, but I might be thrown off if too many bats appeared. By the sound of things, that was going to happen sooner rather than later. As more screeching came from the dark, Nick started to look around to find a spot to make a stand. Bats of different sizes flew between the trees, getting ready to attack. Finally, Nick skidded to a stop, his heels digging into the ground. I stumbled off, my back facing his. I fired, taking down a bat that got too close. Duck low, Nick told me. I got down to my knees, expecting something to attack us. Instead, Nick spun around on his heel, using the shockwave coming from the orchestra, taking out trees in a large circle surrounding us. My curses were drowned out by the sounds of the trees crashing down and bats screeching in displeasure. Soon, they came flocking back, red eyes glowing through the dark. The fear came back. I doubted we could take on so many creatures staring us down. I didn't sense any stress from Nick, only the murderous intent from the monsters in the woods above us. More creatures were flying in swarms, ready to attack if any opening became available. Sweat started to drip down the side of my face. The only thing I could do was dug in my heels and shoot. A bat came swooping down from the trees, mouth open with countless teeth, aiming directly at my face. I only hit it because it was coming right at me. It fell with a heavy thud to the ground, only to have two more take its place. Nick started his attacks as well. Each swing of his sword cut down double the number of bats that I killed. His attacks rang out with a clear sound that somehow didn't ease my stress. A smaller bat I didn't notice came from the side to clamp down on my arm. I yelled in pain, trying to shake it off. The flapping wings got into my face, obscuring my vision. Nick turned to take down an oversized bat that nearly took my head off as I dealt with the smaller one. Unable to pry the bat off my arm, I ducked down to shove the creature against the ground, pinning it with the arm it was chewing on, with the wings still. I pressed my gun against its head, hoping for a weak bullet. I got lucky and killed the bat, then took the few seconds to get its remaining teeth from my arm. It bled and stung like crazy, but I was still alive. As I straightened up, the situation got worse. No matter how many bats Nick killed, 10 more took their place. The fear caused me to freeze for a second. My partner was working his best to keep his attacks up while not taking me out with friendly fire. The few seconds of fear that made me pause firing was all it took. Nick was turned away for a moment. A massive bat swooped in, claws out, both of its feet clamped onto my shoulder, the sharp nails digging into the skin. With 2 beats of the wings, it lifted us both off the ground. Nick turned. His hand reached out, trying to grab my leg. I felt his fingers brush against my ankle. Then I was out of reach. I struggled, trying to get free. Hundreds of bats of different sizes swarmed Nick when he paused attacking, trying to stop my kidnapping. Turns out, I was deathly afraid of heights. The bat carried us higher, far beyond the treetops. For a brief moment, I could see Nick bursting through the swarm of bats, trying to reach me somehow. I let out a scream, thrashing, not knowing what to do. If I was dropped from this height, I would die. We flew at crazy speeds through the air. It was freezing cold, but I would be trembling regardless. The wind was so powerful I couldn't breathe that well. I had no idea where this bat was taking me, or what it was going to do. A terrible sound caused me to push through and to look where it was coming from. A massive swarm of bats were flying around in a ball. We were heading right for it. My mouth became so dry I couldn't even scream. Without any doubt, if I was brought into that ball, I would be eaten alive. The gun was still in my hand, debating what to do. I looked between the ball of screeching death into the ground. I needed to make a choice in the next few seconds. Death by bats, or falling to my death. Just as I tightened my grip, Nick made the choice for me. I caught a glimpse of him in the trees below. It looked as if he just threw something. I heard a small object shoot past my ear, tearing through the bat wings and keep going into the ball of creatures. A blinding white light came from the middle as all the bats were blown away. The one carrying me screeched and I felt the claws release their grip. Nick had tossed the bullet he had kept, causing the bat trying to take me away to let go. He also took care of the others that may swoop in, stealing a falling morsel. My body flipped as I tried to stay steady while crashing back down to the ground. My stomach was in my throat. I'd been on some roller coasters and rides that dropped from a certain height, but nothing compared to the feeling of free falling. The wind made it nearly impossible to keep my eyes open. I expected to hit the trees, but below, the ground was even further down than I thought. A cliff separated two parts of the forest. Nick was on the higher ground, running to the edge trying to reach me before it was too late. I caught sight of him while I fell. He wasn't going to make it. I flew past and he didn't hesitate to jump after. My body flipped so I could try and reach a hand out to his. He looked so close, and yet our fingertips were so far away. I knew there were only a few more seconds until I hit the ground. Nick did something I didn't understand. He drew his sword while in mid-fall to send a shockwave onto the ground below. I felt something hard slam into my back. However, I opened my eyes, finding I'd only been knocked out for an unknown amount of time. On my back, I stared up at the night sky with bats flying around searching for their next meal. Aside from being stiff, I didn't feel as if I'd hit the ground from dropping miles in the air. Something was in my hand, so I curled my fingers around it. Nick had placed his fingers in my palm and he weakly squeezed back, starting to sit up. His voice made me stop. "Please, don't sit up yet. I'm injured and I do not wish for you to see," Nick said, and I felt my stomach flip. I should be the one dead, or nearly dead. What happened? How badly was Nick hurt? I suppose if he hit the ground from the cliff height, he would have broken something. The fear returned as I realized if I could see the bats, they could see us. My heart was nearly beating out of my chest as I watched them dip in the sky searching. I waited for them to spot us, but they never did. "Nick, what? How am I still alive?" I asked, the first question that came to mind while staring at the flying creatures. "I was not certain if you would have died immediately if you hit the ground. I took a risk and hit you back upwards with a shockwave from the orchestra, assuming you may live through being hit by one. Compared to falling, I only needed you to stay alive for a few seconds to heal you," Nick explained, still sounding a bit weak. As much as I wanted to sit up and see how badly he was hurt, I respected his wishes. "How did you heal me?" I thought a spell like that would be too much for my body. I went through everything I knew about magic, trying to see if I missed something, until Nick spoke again. "I can sacrifice a part of my body in exchange for something else. I used a fingernail to ensure you didn't die. You would be asleep for at least an hour. I was injured from the fall, so I quickly created a barrier to keep us hidden from the bats. However, that spell was too much for myself and I suffered a great deal of blowback. We shall be protected until almost sunrise. I took some medicine before the spell to keep the pain away and to keep me awake for a while. It may run out in less than an hour though." I squeezed Nick's hand tighter. My partner had risked everything to save me. I started to try and think of something, anything to help him. He could absorb dead supernatural creatures to recover. If I sat safe in the circle he created and shot bats out of the sky, then he could use them to heal what damage the spell caused. Still holding onto his hand, my other reached into my holster. My heart sank when I found it empty. While I was falling, my gun was in my hand. I either dropped it when the bat let go, or when the shockwave hit. Without a gun, I was useless. Nick would be out cold, and the barrier would be finished before the sun rose. That left me alone and unarmed for a while, with an unknown number of monsters ready to eat us. I was still on my back, but my head started to feel light from how bleak our future looked. "Skylar, this may be a personal question, but I've been meaning to ask you something." Nick's voice cut through my fears and worries. I couldn't fathom him ever caring about something personal, let alone during a time like this. Okay, Nicky. Shoot." After a long pause, with him looking for the right words, he spoke again. "Are you dead set on fully transitioning through medical means?" I felt a terrible emotional bubble in my chest and my face got hot. I nearly crushed his hand without noticing. Because of how people treated me in the past, I'd only heard the first part of his question. My knee-jerk reaction was to get angry. I forced it all down, and memories of my family asking if I was certain about my gender and if I just didn't like my hair short or wearing boyish clothing came back, or them saying I would grow out of these feelings. You need to explain what you mean. My voice came out with a hint of venom I really didn't want it to have. Sorry, I mean if there was a different way to change your body to what it should be. Would you be open to a different process? I am. Nick paused to collect himself for a second. What he was going to tell me was a big deal and something I already knew. But shouldn't. I am a failed philosopher's stone. That is why my body can be used to power spells, or sacrificed in exchange for something else. I could use a piece of my liver to change your body without the need for the surgery. I know it's sudden and an odd thing to bring up, since I would be easy to take a part of my liver right now. I thought it would be a good time to offer. Countless thoughts came rushing through my head. No surgery meant not spending that huge sum of money. There was also no taking time off work for recovering or risks of dying on the table, no matter how small. I also wouldn't need other surgeries for touch-ups on the face I felt still held hints of my feminine past. I could be thinking about how so many people would kill to have the offer Nick just gave me. Instead, I shot up to look at him at his comment about how I could just take a piece of his organ. I didn't care about myself, only how hurt my partner was. I let out a small gasp as I looked at him. His face fell into a bit of a worried look. He really didn't want me to see him in such a state. He was on his stomach, or what was left of it. He lifted himself up slightly on one arm as the other still had a hand in my own. His legs were too far down. The suit jacket covered up the gore, but I could see how flat it was underneath. His body was separated above his waist. Organs spilled free under his jacket. How he was still alive was a miracle. How he was even aware and talking was beyond a miracle. Tears came to my eyes. An ache came to my chest, making it feel hollow. Nicky was in such terrible condition, and yet he was still thinking of someone else. Jesus. This isn't. Words spilled out, not making any sense. I wanted to help but couldn't. I think we can worry about getting a piece of your liver later. Right now, we need to focus on keeping you alive. He gave a slight nod and looked up to the sky as if trying to come up with a plan. I realized what I suggested after the words came out and needed to correct myself. No, wait. I don't want this to happen to you again. I don't want you to be cut open and exposed. I couldn't bring myself to describe it in any other way. It's fine. I'll take a piece out from myself anytime you're ready. His honest tone made my eyes flood with tears. I shook my head, forcing them down while biting the inside of my cheek. If I started crying, I wouldn't stop. If someone told me there was a person as kind as Nick out there in the world before I met him, I wouldn't believe them. It's my fault we're in this mess. If I was a stronger partner, you wouldn't have gotten so hurt time and time again. Why would you be alright cutting your stomach open for someone like me? I asked, my voice hoarse. You called me Snickerdoodle. He replied as if the answer was obvious. What? I asked, rubbing my eyes. How on earth was that an answer? I am only important because my body holds power. Everyone sees me as an object, or is put off by my tone of voice. Abarash is kind, but even she has taken pieces to test. I'll gladly offer you a part of myself because you're the only person who won't ever demand it. I've never wanted to hug a friend so badly in my life. After we got him all stitched back together, I owed him one. I owed him a lot more than a hug, no matter what. I was going to make sure we were getting out of this forest. Finally, my eyes cleared of tears. A new feeling of determination set in. The monsters above us still cried out looking for food. The fear was still heavy in my chest. Hell, I was scared to death. I knew how weak I was, but I couldn't let that feeling get us killed. After we get out of here, I'll think of 100 nicknames for you. First, how long do you think you'll be awake for? A little over 10 minutes. That didn't give us much time. I considered trying to find my gun to kill a bat and drag over to Nick to get himself healed up. The issue was, it could have fallen anywhere. If one bat found me before I found my gun, it was all over. I need to kill some bats for you, but I dropped my gun. I need a weapon. Can I throw the bullets like you did? Instead of answering my question out loud, he let go of my hand to reach for the orchestra next to himself, wrapping one hand over the thin sheath. He held it out. I can't. It's a magic sword, right? Can I even use it? I asked, looking at the sleek back sheath and the delicate golden hilt. The orchestra was made as a blade to protect, not mindlessly kill. As long as you have something precious to protect, it will let you wield its power. You have also given it nothing but respect, so you are going to have no issue holding it. Carefully, I let him place it in both of my hands. I expected it to be heavier, but it was lighter than my gun. I still doubted myself, clutching the sword tight. I thought of all the times I'd seen Nick use it. The one time it got snippy with him and refused to be used for a while was after he had cut the van in half. The rest of the time he was using it to protect something precious. His partner. I was going to do the same. I looked at his dark eyes silently, saying I was ready. Let it sing, he told me. I stood, looking up at the dark sky swarming with bats. I drew the sword with a ringing sound echoing through the small clearing. I kept the sheath in a belt loop, not wanting to dirty it by placing it on the ground. My hand shook slightly, but I could feel the sword didn't care. It knew my reason for borrowing its power and approved of it, not knowing what else to do. I swung the sword towards the sky with all the strength in my arm. Something in my chest pulled as a shockwave came out. It crashed into a mass of bats, knocking them from the sky. I wasn't relying just on the sword's powers. Each attack took some of my own strength. I would give it everything my body held. With another swing, I aimed above us, hoping a few bats would drop nearby, but not on top of Nick. The sword in my hand quickly overtook my reason. It was similar to the eel that wanted to cut and would force the user to do so. But the orchestra was overwhelming me with frantic excitement. My arm swung again, then again, making more ringing noises that cried out with the shockwave crashes. I could do nothing as the sword completely overtook my body. Each attack added to the song it was creating, something that shouldn't sound as beautiful as it did. The sounds of the sword mixing with the dying cries of the monsters and their bodies hitting the ground. I was unaware of how long it lasted. My entire self was in a frenzy trying to keep up with the song. Everything ached. My arms felt heavy, and my chest burned with every breath, and yet I still attacked. There may not even be any more creatures to kill by the time the song died down and the sword released its grip. I don't even remember placing the orchestra back into its sheath as I passed out yet again on that job. The sword may have saved my life, but it was a terrifying power I did not want to be lost in ever again. Birds chirping woke me up. I couldn't even raise my head for a long while. Nick's suit jacket was placed over my chest as a blanket, and I was against a tree. It looked to be mid-morning. Panic rose when I didn't see my partner. Soon, he came out of the bushes, and weirdly enough, he was wearing my jacket. "Skylar, are you feeling all right?" he asked as he trotted over. "I was looking for your gun. No luck yet." "Yeah, just sore. I don't know how you can handle a sword like that. Why are you wearing my jacket?" It may not be an important question, but it bothered me enough to ask. Getting down low, he looked around as if someone was listening in. "Can you keep a secret?" he asked in a hushed tone. "Okay." This was weird. Weirder than man-eating purple bats. "Yes," I said cautiously, still looking around as if he was going to be caught. He slowly opened up one jacket pocket while trying to keep from too much sunlight getting inside. I peered down, expecting anything. My chest tightened when I saw a bundle of very small bundles of fur together. When one raised its head and yawned, I could clearly see what he stuffed the pockets with. "Nicky was loaded with tiny bats. As you were attacking, I blacked out for a short while. When I came to, you were exhausted and collapsed. We were surrounded by dead bats, but also these little ones. I've collected all the ones I saw. I think the person who is going to take the twins can take these as well." Of course, he was taking some sort of pet back home. But if these were somehow connected to the bats we were fighting, was that safe? Did Nick use his power again, or were these just baby versions of the velvet bats from the destroyed farm? "Shouldn't you hand these in to be studied or something?" I offered. "They'll cut them apart. I do not believe any kind of information is worth torturing the innocent for. It's why I took the twins in the first place," Nick said, closing the pocket, hiding away his new bundles of fur. "With permission, right?" He looked away, and that was all the answer I needed. I'll admit, I was on his side. I might not have been if it was a pocket full of spiders. But bats, they're cute as hell. The monstrous ones that tried to kill us all night weren't. But the rest, every non-supernatural bat was cute, and I would fight anyone who would say otherwise. Nick helped me to my feet, both of us careful not to crush his new friends as we hobbled along. In the daylight, I could see the damages from the night before. I couldn't believe I was the one responsible for so many trees being cut to pieces and the ground chewed up in deep grooves. As we walked along, I wondered how we would find our way back to the guard station. The answer came out of the bushes with a smile and a wave. He was tall with black hair and sunglasses. I thought he was the same agent who was our backup on Luna's case and I'd seen very briefly. Turns out that was his brother, and there were a lot of agents in his family that looked alike. He was nice enough to get us back to the fence and to a car that would drive us the hell out of there. He also found my gun before he found us, which was a nice surprise. The agent assumed that the magic storage in the farm exploded and was glad we didn't get caught up the blast. Nick was about to correct him, but I gave his foot a kick to stop him. If people were after his body for power, knowing he could do this much damage was not going to help with that. We let the agent assume what he wanted. Nick was going to write an official report later. We were both put in the back of a car to take the bumpy road back to civilization. I was still exhausted from the night but wanted to talk to Nick about the offer he brought up. I feel guilty about not jumping on your offer to give up a part of your liver for me. I can't help but think about all the people who would kill for something like this and take you up on it in a heartbeat. I know at some point I am going to. And I know what I want my body to be, but I think if it happened overnight I wouldn't be able to deal with the sudden change, and that makes me feel like I'm an imposter. I don't have transgender friends. I don't openly talk to people about what I am. I just feel so fake. At one point I got pretty involved in some threads online reading about how others dealt with it all, and yet my experiences never lined up with their own. I'm rambling, but the more I think about this, the more I question myself about if I have any right being who I am if I don't take you up on your offer the first moment we can. We drove down the road, our driver not paying any attention to us but rather trying to avoid the bigger bumps along the way. Nick listened patiently. I didn't expect him to answer. I just didn't have anyone else to talk to about this situation, and it's not as if I could call up my sister telling her magic was real. She would try and have me locked up if I started with that. Do you think people who crossed the finish line last didn't run a marathon just because they didn't come in first? Nick offered finally. I see what you're trying to get at, but this isn't really comparable to a marathon. My old partner always said I was bad at metaphors. What I am trying to get at is everyone has their own pace and their own goals. You'll always be male. It doesn't matter if you're taking small steps to line up your body to what you're comfortable with. It does not matter what others have experienced, because they are not you. I never assumed the answer could be so simple. I was always worrying and overthinking it all. I just really needed someone to give me an easy answer. Reaching out, I took Nick's hand, grateful I found a friend like him. He looked a bit confused but let our hands stay the way they were. The road was still bumpy, causing the car to rock. Soon we both fell asleep, no matter how jarring the ride was. The agent that was driving didn't know if he should wake us up when we arrived, so he let us sleep for another hour until Abarash came to pick up Nick for his report, and so she could get me back home. From what I heard, the rest of the velvet bats were found and killed, their bodies taken, and the place where the farm once stood filled in. The corporation planted new trees to replace the ones our fight knocked over. The loss of the farm set an example to the others to not become cheap with their laborers, and for the corporation to add in-person agent check-ins to ensure the farms were not creating powerful feral bats for extra profit. The moment I got back home, I kicked off my shoes, ready for a shower. I was going through and ruining clothing on these jobs with Nick at an alarming pace. Pausing, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror before it fogged up from the steam. I could change my appearance at any time. It would only cost a friend to cut himself open to take out a small piece in exchange. There were a lot of things I didn't like about my reflection, but I liked the idea of using Nick in the same way everyone else wanted to, even less. I could keep going at my own pace. Maybe someday I might take him up on what he was offering. But for now, I was fine disliking a few things until I got ready to change them.